David Garbut, poetry postcard practitioner from Dornach, Switzerland.
Thank you.
How long have you been there?
In Switzerland, I've been here, oh my goodness, it's like 20, 28 years. It'll 28 years, that's right. It was 94 I came here.
How did you end up there?
Ah, well, there's two sides to this. One was I was offered a contract as a programmer. I worked as a programmer in those days in the pharma industry, and Basel is big in the pharma industry. And the marketplace in the UK was not going very well. So um, uh, I'd been on a visit, a working visit for 2 months before, 2 years before that, and I thought, yeah, I'll go there. And then the other reason is, and you can decide for yourselves which is the true reason, is that I was realized that I was falling in love with this woman I'd met through the poetry readings I'd been doing, and uh, I thought, no, this isn't good. She's too young, and etc. 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 And so I thought, no, you're best to run away. Definitely best to run away. And of course, I did run away then. So, but the problem is, of course, that once you've thought that, it's too late. But yeah, we're still good friends, so that's okay.
Any connection made through poetry, you have to be very skeptical, I think. Romantic connections, that's what I feel.
Yeah, there's always Ted and Sylvia, isn't there, in the background?
Well, that could be the subject of a whole interview in itself, but we want to talk postcards. But before we do, is there a Rudolf Steiner connection to your living in the international home of his movement?
No, no, that's completely coincidental. The reason I moved out here is that I met a Swiss woman in '97, and uh, we got married in '99, and she was grew up in Dornach, and her father's Iranian and her mother's Austrian, and he was a doctor in the hospital here. Well, he was head doctor actually, and so when she got pregnant around 2003, um, we realised that the flat that we had in Basel wasn't really big enough. So for baby stuff and a special corner for baby and all that, plus my library, and so we uh, looked for a house, and it just happened that they had just built a development of houses right next to where they lived. So we moved out here to be near them, and so they've had a good grandparenting experience, and she's had the 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 presence of her grandparents through. She's 18 now, so and yeah, so I think yeah, it was a very good decision. But that was
Excellent.
why we came here. But it's a beautiful place, I have to say.
I imagine
I
so.
like it very much.
How did you find out about the Postcard Fest?
Um, that's a good question. I think I saw it, came across it on a tweet or a website, and I thought, ooh, that sounds fun. I have a lot of postcards that I'll have to chuck out if I don't do something with them. And you don't really send postcards to people much these days. I bought all those mainly back in the 90s when I was sending postcards to friends back in the UK and stuff. And now I have Facebook, so I don't need to do that. Um, and so I thought, yeah, that will kill two birds with one stone. And I was looking for something to make me write more often, because I've always found that if I sit in a workshop, I can write something. If I sit at home thinking, I can't, or most of the time I don't. So um, and now that I'm retired, I look after the house and the cleaning and the cooking especially. So my wife is still working, so there's a lot of distractions to kind of like get in the way of the poet. So I thought, well, this will be good. I'll be able to find 20 minutes a day, surely. Yeah. And I did.
Is that what it takes? 20 minutes?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Take us through your process.
Oh, well, I would pick up the card. I would look through the list of addresses, find the next one. I mark them all with a marker when they're done, and write the address on the postcard. And then I would look at the picture a bit and think, okay, what next? And then something would pop into my head, and I would write down the first line and then keep going. I
On the
mean,
card.
on the card, yeah. First shot on the card only. And once or twice, I kind of changed the line endings subsequently, or maybe fixed one or two words. There's one or two postcards that have a black splodge in where I changed the word as I was writing it, but that was it. I haven't. There's one poem I want to revise and rewrite completely, but otherwise I'm pretty happy with them. But this is kind of how I compose anyway.
It's a scary thought to a lot of people composing directly on the card like that.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, but um, the scary bit's posting it. I mean, you don't have to post it. You can throw it away and do another one. So I mean, of course, I thought, no, I'm not going to think about that. I'm going to be brave and just send it out. And I thought, well, yeah, it's okay. No one's ever going to see it anyway, so, except one person. But yeah. I think that's definitely something that one has to. The fear of writing is something, and the fear of it fitting into your oeuvre. The fear. There's all sorts of fears a poet can have, like getting a really crap rhyming, and not being able to find another one, or not being able to think of anything sensible to say. All of these things, but the postcards I had bought because I originally because there was some connection. I mean, mostly they were like 30 years ago, roughly. So I don't know. I can't necessarily remember the exact reason that prompted me to buy them now, but um, some were from exhibitions I'd been to. Others were just people whose work I admired, and I found a whole book of their cards in a shop, remaindered or something like that. So I bought them. That's the. I have several Escher um, poem etchings, and also the Aubrey Beardsley ones came by that route. Also, I had some that were from places I'd lived, and one of the places I lived before I came to live in Basel, but while I was still working in Switzerland, was in a town called Rheinfelden, which is about 13 kilometers upriver. So that's about 8 miles or so upriver, up the Rhine, and is a little town in its own right. It has a part of the town that's in Switzerland and another part that's in Germany. And I could live, because I was an EU member in those days. Brits were in the EU. I could live in the German part without any permits or anything like that. No paperwork. In those days, it was very hard to get residence permission to live in Switzerland, to live and work in Switzerland. You could get they have this frontier arrangement where they allow you to cross the frontier every day, but and you pay them a small amount of tax actually, um, but you can't live, you can't stay overnight in Switzerland.
Sprechen
So
Sie Deutsch?
ja, ein bisschen, ja, ja. Ich verstehe mehr, aber yeah, I'm not a language person, so I
Well,
tried to learn.
we've seen your poems. Au contraire. Uh, when you're talking about spontaneous composition, there's a tradition of spontaneity. I think that really blossomed in the 1950s, post World War II, let's say, with bebop and improv comedy and abstract expressionism, and there was a flourishing of that. Is there a tradition that you're partial to where spontaneity is at the core of it, or it's just something you've been able to teach yourself to do?
Uh, no, there isn't really. I don't think I've come across that tradition in the UK poetry scene. Um, it's far more intense. But I mean, like, that's a bad word to use because jazz is very intense. Um, I mean, my father played jazz trombone and jazz piano, although he that was just his Saturday night thing. He had a full time job, um, and so and I've always loved the vein of rock music that has improvised um, pieces in it. Um, I have well, quite often, I think, since I was young, made up verses on the spot, jokes and things like that. And so it's a source, I think. And I think the thing is that if I put you in a situation and I say, right, write an improv verse, it's actually no different from you sitting down at your desk at 3 in the morning or whenever it is that you prefer to write and thinking, oh my God, I've got this inspiration, I have to write it down. The only difference is in your head that you are saying, I now give myself permission to write and see what happens. Because when it comes down to it, that's always what you do. Because I don't know any poet who sits down, like novelists do, with an outline and plans a massive poem and then writes it verse by verse, like a novelist might write a chapter a day. I'm prepared to be surprised that there are people like that, but I've never met one for sure. So, and that's one of the things that I value about poetry. I think it should anyway at least sound as if it's improvised in a sense. It should sound urgent, if that makes sense.
Well, I think hearing some of your work, you can point out the urgency for us. You were good enough to compile your whole August 2021 output and send it to me as a PDF. So I can pull it up on the screen quite easily. So let me do
Yeah.
that. I'm going to share screen and pull this up. And this is your third one.
Okay. Yeah. So this is the second one was a bit of a disaster. I didn't like that. I'd slipped back into a kind of like teenage putting in couplets thing, and it didn't really. I felt didn't pull it off. But there's a really core of an interesting poem in there, so I'm going to rework that. So this is maybe you'd like to look at the picture. If you could scroll up and we'll see the picture. This is a print by MC Escher, and it's one of his illusion prints where actually the shapes of the bird and the fish match up, and you can completely tile them. They completely tile the card. And what he's done is turned by drawing the fish at the bottom into real fish, and then progressively they get abstract, and then they turn into the surface of the water, and then the birds that are actually in the holes between the fish fly off into the air. And I just thought this is wonderful. So the poem begins, and I thought to myself, how did how did a fish become a bird? Slowly, passing the dream of air and walking through trees, down from egg to terrestrial egg, to flapping limbs, to limbs with feathers, and then to fly. Look down and notice all fits together.
This lineation on the page, may I ask you, is this kind of how it looked on the card? And do you try and recreate that? Or when you type them up later, you make them look differently than the card? How do you do
I
that?
I think that's I think that's pretty well how it looked on the card. There was maybe a smaller gap before the second egg, but I'm sure. Yeah, I indented and dashed slowly. Definitely, I do have the card image, so uh, it would be possible to find that if you want to pause or something like that.
Well, no, it's. I just like to get a sense of how people do the fest because I
Yeah,
think these interviews are very helpful for those who look at spontaneous composition and just think it's the hardest thing ever, and that, there's a they're hoping Shakespeare strikes every time, or whoever they see as the ultimate poet. Um, but
I think
go ahead.
as a poet, I think as a poet especially, it is very very important to let go of your ego about how you want people to read and love and adore your work. I think if you don't do that, then you can't write properly. For one thing, when you write, you reveal yourself, and so if you're too worried about getting liked and loved, then it's not going to happen. And I I had an amazing experience when I first started going to poetry workshops in in my 30s. Well, no, my 30s in my late 30s. About I was about 38, and I'd written a lot when I was in my teens, but not dared to show it to many people. And uh, there was one guy who was in the class was uh, studying English, and we kind of discussed everybody's poems, and it came to mine, and it was a kind of like a poem that I'd done in the voice of someone else, and and he sort of analysed it, and he went through it, and he said, "Well, yes, and I think at this point the voice is, clearly saying blah 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 blah, and they're really not happy about that choice, and they're really, and and I was just struck like a thunderbolt because when he said that, I remembered that I had had that thought in the back of my head, but I hadn't put it on the paper. I thought, and I, I definitely, when I read the poem, I thought, well, this is nice and simple, and it was not. I had put in there was psychology in there, which I was not aware I'd put in there. I don't know how I did that. And so, readers are very clever. Readers are very, very sharp. And the more poetry you read, the better you will be at that. And actually, also, the more poetry you discuss with other people and other poets and so on. So, joining a group is a fantastic thing to do. Some of them are abusive and appalling, but you get out of those ones. Don't stay there. Um, I went through that phase. At that time, I was going from group to group, trying to find one that was right for me. And actually, I drew up, in the end, I drew up a set of rules which basically exclude the worst kind of abuses that you get in those kind of groups. So, for example, in one group, the woman who led it said, well, yes, I'm only going to bring poems along here which I published. And this is one that I found in I had it published in the Spectator. That's a kind of right wing uh, magazine in the UK, a bit like, I don't know, something else in the US. Anyway, New York Times. No, not the New York Times, the New Yorker maybe. And, um, and so she read her poem, and I thought to myself, why? What is the point? We can't comment on this because it's published already. It's completely futile. And all the only reason she could want to read it to us is if we all go, "Wow, that's fantastic." We are not worthy, and so um, another one I joined, and it was 6 months before they gave me an evening to read something. And I spent monthly meetings, 6 months, talking about their stuff and giving them great feedback. So all those things I pulled together into the group that we were in at that time. And
What does this poem say about you?
this poem,
Yes.
oh, it says I'm a zoologist. I was trained as a zoologist. I'm fascinated by animals, how they got to be here, um, why they are here, why we are here, how close we are to them. That fascinates me as well. Much closer than we like to think. A lot of people like to think. And when I started it, I never thought of it as an evolution thing. But of course, birds are descended from fish just like humans are. It's a way, way back, of course. And that thought just grew as I wrote the poem, which was wonderful, actually.
Let's read the next one, shall we?
Yeah. Okay. So this is, yeah. If we can have a quick look at the picture. So this is a postcard of a village in the snow. Um, the street is called Highgate, and it's Moor Hill, which is a little village in the what we call the Weald of Kent, which is the range of chalk hills that are to the south of London, and which have lots of woods and stuff. A very beautiful area. It's also the stockbroker belt where people commute into London from, and that's a pub sign, of course. And I've
Did you
annotated it.
you've added, what does that say?
So the bottom one is pointing to a car, I believe.
Land Rover.
Land Rover, yeah, of course, because yuppies drive Land Rovers, right? And country people. And then the bird up in the tree is a goldfinch. I mean, in my imagination, there's a bird in the tree.
Right.
And then there's a sign pointing to the pub where you can go for refreshment.
Excellent.
And so I I was born in an area in London called Hampstead, which is also where John Keats lived last few years of his life, and where he met Fanny Brawne. And the house that he lived in at that time is now a museum. And next door, there is a library, and that was my children's library when I was at primary school.
Fantastic.
And so Archway is a road that leads up to Highgate Hill in London. And Highgate Hill was, of course, there's the Highgate Cemetery with Karl Marx and lots of other famous people buried there. And so this is the fact. This is, yeah. I thought this poem was Highgate. I mean, the place. I thought the place was Highgate, so I started writing a poem about London. And I realised the picture was actually somewhere else. So I'm just looking for my glasses because I think I'll be better off with my reading glasses for this bit. And I have a quote as well. So this is from a poem by John Keats, which I suspect is about Highgate Hill, actually. Sometimes goldfinches, one by one, will drop from low-hung branches. Little space they stop, but sip and twitter, and their feathers sleek. Then, off at once, as in a wanton freak. And that's from the poem I Stood Tiptoe Upon a Little Hill. Come up from Archway, come up to the Red Lion, spend a day with Dickens, or walk to Copperfield's College, past the cottage, past the bollards, spare captured cannons from Napoleon's army, and on to Sam Coleridge's first resting place, and the Flask, where Hogarth showed us ourselves, and we schlepped another gin, and walked on. This is the Highgate of my youth, but here I came, late upon the world, and lacking friends and fame, and found it fine. Places have their own specificity. Connect it right, it's electricity. Yeah, well, you can tell it's unrehearsed.
Well, it's nice to slip on the word gin, because then we figure you know what it's like to have had a couple of them. Um,
Indeed.
and
Yeah.
and and
Luckily, I
of
didn't
course,
do that.
the rhyming couplet as a nod to the romantic origins of the poem or inspirations of the poem.
Mm. Mm.
How about one more? Let's
Yeah,
let's go,
sure.
and you've got the link there. Okay, here
Yeah.
we go. And the picture first.
Yeah. So this is the town of Rheinfelden where I lived when I first came to work in Switzerland. I lived on the other side. This is from the this painting is done from the Swiss side, and it's a lot more built up now, believe me. Um, and but you can see there's the old bridge there, which is a version of it is still there. It's been built a bit lower than that, and it's now pedestrian only. And they built a motorway further down, and you can see two towers sticking up from the from the village. And these two towers are one is the Catholic Church and one is the Protestant Church, and their clocks are not in sync. And I guess there's lots of reasons for that, but it has a kind of, to me, it's sort of symbolic. Anyway, so um, Rheinfelden, 1995. By the two towers in Friedrichstrasse, I lived between two worlds, between two languages, and running away. Two towers, two sects, chiming every quarter hour, a minute apart. And my heart was like that, catching up. And my head was like that, splitting. But every evening I'd walk to the river to watch. Another way of being.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Your work, I mean, to have written that spontaneously, I mean, that to me, these seem very clear, very, I mean, you would think one labored over them for a long time, but you essentially just dashed them off. And as we, as we remember hearing earlier in the talk, it's a matter of sublimating one's ego and letting something greater come through. Would you say something
I,
greater comes through? Is it the muse?
I hope it is. Yeah, I hope people like it. I mean, like I said, I've trained myself to kind of care about the poems as I write them and then send them away. Like you have to send your children away because I can't bear the pain to think, they're not going to find a partner and stuff. So, um, and I would, yeah, I mean, when I started that, I had no idea it was going to be that deep. But, that's how it was. That's how it was. It was like that.
That's fantastic. What would you say to someone who's thinking, "Oh, that poetry fest sounds nice. I write poems, but I don't know about composing spontaneously like that. I'm not so sure." What would you tell them?
Um, I would say, you know, do it. If if you really want to um, control how good your output is, then maybe don't send them, or if you have to send something you prepared earlier. If you really really have to write over it and write a new card, but I would say it's a lot more. You are going to. It's going to take you to a place. If you're really scared of doing that, then doing it will take you to a place you haven't been, and that will be wonderful because the kind of like friction of the new it makes in your head will cause things to happen. I mean in when I was got back into that writing group in the 90s, um, I really I think yeah there was a time in my life where I was a very mediative and submissive in a way person, and I would not put myself forward, and I would not fight for things, and uh, yeah, I didn't have a happy marriage because of that, and work was sometimes also ditto. And uh, I I learned, and so when I wrote poems, I tried always to tie all the things up and make it like a happy ending in my poem, because I came, I come to make it see a happy side of it, or whatever. And then I realized through those workshops, and seeing other poets at work and discussing it, then I realized that a single poem is just a single poem. It's not a novel that has to encapsulate everything. If I write one poem that I'm angry about X, I can write another poem that say, well, I do accept X after all. It doesn't all have to be together. And in fact, if poems gain from emotional intensity, and so by not completing them, not feeling you have to close them in and finish them off and make them pretty and tie a bow around it, then you get stuff out which is much more powerful. And people, if you write a poem about being angry about, say, the climate crisis, people are going to say, yeah, and there's something about catharsis. You can't have catharsis without, which means, the emotional processing and acceptance of a situation or an event. You can't have that without feeling it. And so that's, so once I started doing that, it started also, it changed my poetry massively, and it started changing also how I felt about things. And so I'm a lot more assertive these days.
Well, I loved your work. I love the fact that you sent me the PDF. Would you make that PDF available to people who wanted it?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
I'm
that would be great.
yeah.
Send that to me.
That one was a bit large, that one, but I'm working on a smaller version, and I'm fixing all the typos. And what I'll do is, if I rewrite the second poem, I will leave both in as a lesson.
Fair enough. Well, um,
I'm also going to publish them on, planning to publish them on Medium, on my account on Medium, so
excellent.
people will be able to go there if they're subscribers.
Do send me the link to your Medium account.
I'll do that. Yeah, absolutely.
Do send me a publicity photo so I may include that in the post.
A publicity photo. Oh my god.
That's
Yeah.
right. That's right. I mean, if you continue to smile like you are now, I can simply take that as a screenshot. But
Yeah.
Dave, it's a delight to meet people like you through this Poetry Postcard Fest project. And there's so much consciousness. There's so much, it seems to me, authenticity in what you do. And I'm really grateful that we cross paths and that you're part of this festival. I hope that you'll do it year after year.
I certainly plan to join in next year. I enjoyed it very much. It was um, I'd just done a course, a 3-week course just before it started, and around the same time I joined a workshop um, which is writing exercises once a week. So I'm still doing that. So it's I really wanted to write more, and I'm writing more. And actually, sitting down and writing a poem a day is great. I didn't quite manage a poem a day. There was my birthday is towards the end of August, and so I had my 70th birthday. So I took about 2 or 3 days off and wrote madly on one of the other days.
And treated yourself to a little bit of Tanqueray, I would imagine.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, Dave. Thanks.
So it's been very nice talking to you, and I'm very, very happy you enjoyed the poems. It's great to hear that.